welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind, just provide us a little bit of brief background on what you do and where you work at today.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and chat with you. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Provider Compensation for Optum.
Excellent. And then prior to joining Optum, tell me a little bit about your journey to Optum.
Yeah, so it's been a fun journey, and I think it's been interesting being on both sides of the fence a bit. So I've worked in the consulting space and started my career with healthcare appraisers and worked largely in the FMV and comp modeling space, and then ended up going in-house to Mayo Clinic, where I led physician, scientist, and executive compensation, and then working in strategy and consulting with Coker and now Optum. So been a bit all over the place. It's been fun though.
That sounds like a fun journey. It's actually a very common theme that I see with a lot of leaders at organizations that they've done fair market value, some consulting work, and some in-house work. It seems like it's a dynamic area. Can you tell me about what's your journey kind of within United Health? What has been top of your mind joining them, kind of the largest initiatives that you've been reacting to?
Yeah, so it's been a lot to take in. I think part of initially joining has been really just getting an understanding of what are the drivers in different markets. What does the past look like? What's led to current state? What does the future look like as far as meeting the demands of the clinicians, of the patients, of the organization? And it's, such a large complex scope and large groups that it's been fascinating. And, some of my biggest initiatives right now are really trying to get an understanding of what is the future strategy? How do we build strategy around such a dynamic marketplace right now? We're seeing so much change in physician comp when it comes to how we've got different looks at reimbursement. We've got different looks at what new physicians are needing relative to physicians that have been in practice for a while. We have different looks in the private practice relative to employed space. And I think a lot of these things that keep coming together, and they're not necessarily consistent. They change. And, really working through how do you get a long-term strategy that's flexible, but it's also innovative, that's meeting the right things and giving you the right ways to think about it it's been a large part of the work. So right now I'm really just enjoying that and digging into it.
That's a theme I've been hearing throughout the conference halls today, is not only just the change and evolution of provider compensation in this dynamic market, but it's the pace of change. It seems like the last 2 years, the pace of change has been quicker and substantive. What are some, for folks out there, what type of advice would you give them on managing the pace of change in this market space?
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. I think right now, one of the toughest things coming into this area is trying to balance. There are a lot of opinions out there, and trying to figure out a lot of opinions on the different aspects of how this works. And for many joining organizations, I think they often hear one thing based on how things have looked in the past, or hear something based on, a different group. And I'd encourage people to really to listen to those that are impacted by the comp. And there are a lot of different groups that are theoretically impacted by the comp, but I'd really encourage people to listen to the different perspectives, to sit down with the leaders that are going through these changes. And sometimes it feels that comp can be in the space where it's an Excel sheet, or it's a formula. And, really helping people that are going to this industry understand that formula is directly impacting someone's life and how they're seeing patients, their practice, how patients are impacted by their experience. And, it's a complicated equation, not to, I guess, use a pun with the word comp there, but it is a complicated equation. And I'd really encourage people to sit down, to listen, and to try to understand the ways that these models change so many aspects of how organizations work and run through things.
That's a really important point. When you think, I'll kind of use the analogy from a valuation standpoint. We talked about this earlier, that a lot of valuation work is on businesses or hard assets and real estate. But when you're talking about formulas and coming up with value for compensation, there is this human connection throughout it, that you're impacting someone's financial security. That's also dictating the type of care to it. So having that balance of both the human connection and understanding the deep financial complexities there is important.
Absolutely.
Is there a trend that you've seen in the past 12 months in designing provider comp? Is there different types of models? Do you see the market kind of shifting to eat what you treat, maybe group models? I don't know what do you see that's driving and changing in the market right now?
Yeah, it's I think a lot of the change right now is really shifting towards seeing more and more of the group models are a great example. Seeing more of this idea. I think, if you said 5 years ago, we're going to have these group models, I don't think it would have been even heard of. And now I think, maybe there were groups doing that type of incentive model, but I think now we're starting to see it not only in specialties that might not have seen it historically over the years, but more and more specialties are trying to adopt and trying to find ways to think of, well, how can we make this a team effort? And, there were some groups that I think were doing that in certain areas, but it's really been exciting, I think, to see groups trying to be innovative in this space. And I think overall, models right now and over the last year are looking for innovation. I think people are looking for change, and they're looking for ideas of how do we treat patients in the right way, incentivize treatment in the right way, and not just driving an RVU-based formula. And I think, there are still groups out there that like that individual RVU structure. I think there's not to say that there's not groups that like that, but I think the change that we're seeing now is much more dynamic, much more, I want to look at incentive metrics differently. I want to look at more than just production. I want to look at impact and trying to sort those questions out. So I really see a big shift in that direction, especially recently.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen a lot of focus historically on work RVUs. And I think there's probably two areas that could be potentially driving the change. One is go to team-based care. It's a little bit more team-based instead of individual focused. I think the second too is the fee schedule has been changing so quickly every year, and it has very much disrupted how much you're paying folks, but also the financial security of the organization. If there's big swings, it could really negatively impact that. You couple that with the new AMA release on maternity codes. Help folks understand what are the things that you're looking at from the fee schedule now year to year, and how to manage. Large organizations is pretty dynamic. Help us understand that.
Yeah, the fee schedule, it's, one of the things that's challenging, and exactly to your point, I think it's had enough change in recent years that the dynamic that we're seeing is not only the change in the schedule, but the change in all of the survey data. And we've gotten to a point with many, I think, models and groups where they're used to seeing conversion factors. They're used to seeing these certain figures. When you change the fee schedule and all those numbers change every year, you're having to explain, not only, well, this changed, the value of this changed, removing this, the conversion factors went up or they went down. And I think there's fatigue in that discussion for individuals. I think there's fatigue for physicians always having to look at this and say, well, I'm not changing my behavior, but it's suddenly worth less or more because of something that's published somewhere every year. And I think that's completely driving things. And a lot of times what I'm looking for in the fee schedule is trying to understand, what are the groups that are changing each year? What are the big codes? What are the codes that are being added, going away? What are the big movements? And how do we get ahead to those groups and really assess how it will impact you from a productivity data and benchmarking standpoint, but how's it going to impact what you're doing? How's it going to potentially change how you're perceiving and going about work? And I think that's one of the areas that, the more you look at these changes, if someone says, I'm doing the exact same thing, it's beneficial for patients, it's going well, and the value of that is changing, we have to look at it in a way and say, well, should your comp be changing? Is the value of your service changing because of a value published in a different area? So, it might have been a bit of a long-winded answer, but I really try to tackle it and looking at that aspect of what's the impact of these changes, not only financially benchmarking, but kind of personally and understanding the individual value proposition.
I totally agree. You said the word fatigue there. I think a lot of folks on both sides, providers and I think professionals in-house, are kind of fatigued with the change, that it's been a lot of change to manage. It's impacted benchmarks that you use to evaluate this. It's made it tougher to understand reimbursement and the net impact to the organization and personal compensation to providers. And if you're a provider, you're sitting there, I'm doing the same work that I did last year. And now you're telling me I'm getting paid a different way because of a fee schedule that's changed for reimbursement. That's a tough thing to manage.
So benchmark went up somewhere and all of a sudden I'm not meeting a target and I'm not getting a bonus or I'm not getting incentive because some group reported something that moved something else up, but I'm still slammed all day with patients, seeing patients, and I'm, working hard, and you can't control some of these things. So I think, it can be a challenging conversation to feel year over year that tension of, well, what's going to happen with this data? And do we want to drive that focus in models, or do we want to find other ways to make people feel, valued and make the model really target different objectives?
If you were going to shake the magic 8-ball and look forward, what specialty do you think that we're going to see through the tail end of 26, maybe in 27, that you're going to see the most disruption with in the market?
That's a great question. I think we're going to continue to see, one of the specialties that I think continues to be challenging, and just looking at the kind of future estimates of where the workforce will look, as well as the demands and the shifting in the market. Urology is one that I think is going to continue to be challenging. I think we've seen GI continue to be challenging, but it's also at a point where I think it's been challenging for a while and will continue to be. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to be a new challenge as much as one that we continue to have to try to face and better understand. I think a really interesting specialty and change that I could see being challenging is, what does the future of pulmonary critical care combined type of role look like? And I think it's one where we're seeing a lot of innovation and ways to solve a problem that from a staffing standpoint, but it's going to leave less dedicated people in different areas, as they'll be kind of looking at these combined models or looking at different models. And I think neurology continues to subspecialize, and that can be really beneficial, but really, really challenging in looking for general neurology, looking for different, models that build multiple types of elements. So it's a few of them there, but I think, they'll all be challenging in their own ways, but those few stand out.
I agree, especially I think about the subspecialties areas within neurology. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of development, a lot of demand for those services. I even think about urology, and especially like female urology. There's these subspecialty areas that are very challenging to recruit for and provide access to across a lot of different markets, especially when you have markets that are maybe aging, and have a higher demand on healthcare, but maybe the populations are kind of decreasing. I think of some areas of my hometown and Northeast Ohio is probably a classic example of that, where there's just growing demand, but the infrastructure is a challenging place for investment opportunities.
Yeah, and I think it also has an impact, and it's always fascinating to see some of the ways that these specialties over the years have really continued to kind of grow into some of these unique subspecialties. And I think it's fascinating to see how they're changing and evolving over the years, but it also can result in a trend of everyone's looking for subspecialization and then finding more general specialization, more general practice is becoming more challenging then due to so much subspecialization in some areas. So it's an interesting one, seeing kind of a really cool, exciting, innovative way that groups are looking at medicine and how to design these models to fit these needs, and how it can also offset some of the traditional ways we've looked at medicine in these specialties.
Kevin, I appreciate the time today. I have one last question for you. You're leading the way, you're forging, doing great work in provider compensation. But what did 10-year-old Kevin want to do?
Yeah, 10-year-old Kevin wanted to be a hockey player, and, didn't quite work out.
What position did he play?
I was a goalie.
You were a goalie? Oh my gosh.
You buy goalie gear so many times, and your parents say, "Yeah, this might not be the best call." No, it was fun, and now I've got a 5-year-old that also wants to be a hockey player, and I am going through the early AM practices as a bit of karma for having done that to my parents as well. So
I love that. Fun fact, I played junior A hockey when I was a kid. So at one point I wanted to be a hockey player as well, but it did not work out.
yeah, it's easier said than done, right?
Yes.